I'd like to acknowledge the Tawata Whenua of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and pay my respects to their ancestors and elders.
It's really, really special to be able to be terrified, exhilarated, restrained, bold, all of those things every year. And if you're not all of those things, then you're not going to do a very good job. And if you're not scared at the end of it, I don't think you've pushed yourself as hard as you should have.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Her name is spoken with reverence and respect across the region and throughout the country. She has either won or been nominated for nearly every major winemaking award, and she carries it all with a quiet elegance and grace. I am, of course, talking about Jen Parr of Valli Vineyards, where she crafts wines so deeply rooted in place that they feel like they could shake the earth beneath your feet. Kia ora, Jen.
Kia ora. Thanks for having me.
It's such a pleasure. I have been following your wines and following what you've been doing for a very long time, and I will never forget the first time those wines were lined up in front of me as a sommelier at Key, and I was like, holy crap, where have these come from in the world? And that I still have that feeling to this day.
Sounds like the way I felt the first time I tried Valli as well.
Now, you've had an incredible career, but your accent does allude to the fact that you weren't born in New Zealand. Tell me a little bit about growing up in Oregon and your kind of travels before you got to New Zealand.
Sure. I often am called an American winemaker in New Zealand. Well, not so often anymore, because I do make a correction. I'm actually a New Zealand winemaker that was born in America. And I think that semantics is important because I learned the majority of my craft here in New Zealand, and it's also the place I chose to make my home, and they've fortunately allowed me to stay. So I consider myself certainly a Kiwi winemaker, but I was born, educated, and spent, the first formative time in my life in America. So I certainly have a lot of positive influences from being, American at birth as well.
And you grew up in an area that does have some significant plantings of beautiful grapes. Did you remember that there was kind of grapes growing up in the region?
To be honest, where I was raised, my father, he's 88 and he still lives in the same house where I was born. It's more of suburban Portland, and it's about an hour, depending on traffic, could be an hour and a half from the heart of Oregon wine country. So as my family weren't wine drinkers, we never really had a reason to go out that way. So I was reasonably oblivious to the fact that grapes were in the proximity. There were strawberries. I knew about those because I picked them when I was 10 in my summer holidays. But I had absolutely no idea until I left Oregon to go to university in California. And then it was probably the Napa Valley that caught my attention, and later figured out that actually there are grapes grown close to where I was born as well.
I'm actually kind of not surprised when you talk about Portland. I mean, that is a city that to me almost felt like it wasn't really, it was the States, but it didn't feel a very progressive place. And I can kind of feel if you were part of kind of growing up in Portland, why perhaps New Zealand might have tickled your fancy in terms of living there. But we'll get to that later. What were your first impressions of Napa? It's quite a luminous place that I can see why it would give you, full impressions to start with. Tell me about your travels there.
Well, the first time I went to the Napa, I was at university in the Bay Area. I went to a school, Stanford, which is about an hour and a half from Napa. It's about, well, it depends again on traffic. Say an hour, 45 minutes to San Francisco, and then it's another half hour into Carneros. And I was invited to be a sober driver for a group of ladies. A well-kept secret. I was in a sorority. A lot of people are surprised because it doesn't seem like I would have been a sorority girl because I'm not very good at combing my hair or putting on makeup. But anyway, stereotypes aside, there was a great group of ladies, and they would ask a younger sister if they wanted to drive them all so they could taste wine responsibly. And I, of course, said, I'd be into that. And as luck would have it, that day, one of the senior ladies wasn't interested in tasting. So she said, "Oh, why don't you taste and I'll drive?" So my first foray into the Napa Valley, I actually got to taste wines as well. And it was a magical place, just being surrounded by grapes. The tasting room experience was something I hadn't even fathomed before. And just really, I was sort of, I guess, stung a little bit by the buzz of the whole thing, and from then on, wine was something that I certainly started to think about, and was my drink of choice. Not that I could afford it, but when I did need to bring something somewhere, wine was what I went for.
And now you had a whole career before this one in the global financial software industry. And that took you from, well, the Napa, one very impressive wine region, to another in South Africa.
Yes. In between then, really France was a huge influence, but not Burgundy as you might think, given that I've dedicated my life to Pinot Noir. But I ended up in the southwest of France in an area called Gaillac, which is France's oldest wine growing region. And it's about an hour from Toulouse. So an amazing gastronomic area, very rustic and rural. And a lot of the wines are made from, ancient varieties. And I used to holiday there when I was living in London. And of course, because I was into wine, I saw that there were grapes around and wines from the region. So I started to taste those and then explore the region and get to know a couple of the winemakers. So that was a huge influence on me. But the South Africa connection was really relating back to software sales. Because when I was living in London working for a software company, I was made the country manager for South Africa, but still based in London. So nothing to say about carbon footprint, but I was flying from London to Johannesburg. One year I went 13 times in a year. So that's a lot. And I was mesmerized by not only, Johannesburg itself, I wouldn't say was particularly beautiful, but the clients that I worked with were so proud of South African food, South African wine, that they made sure that when we were out together, that I was tasting everything local. And they even invited me out to their, what we would call batches or holiday homes, and to braais. And they really, really were so proud of the produce of South Africa. And that's when I first encountered these wines. And it resonated with me. So down the track, when I got into wine, I really wanted to return to South Africa through my new lens, which was not selling software to banks, but making wine. And fortunately, with a little bit of perseverance, I was able to do that in 2005. And I went to the Robertson Valley, which is a place that probably not many people have heard of. Everyone's heard of Stellenbosch and Franschhoek and Swartland these days, and Hamilton and all of these other places. But in the Robertson Valley, it's the home of some amazing sparkling wine. And that really shaped me in terms of my wine journey, because it was the first time as a student I was treated like a winemaker. I was given a wine to manage and make myself, and I was sort of flabbergasted that these people would entrust me with some grapes to shape into something that would go in a bottle. But it did give me confidence that if they thought I could do it, then perhaps maybe I could.
An incredible story, and some really beautiful places that you made connections with. I am familiar with the beautiful wines of Domaine de Cosmarin and have loved them for so long. And as you mentioned, just outside of Gaillac, there's these incredible indigenous varieties that you were working with that I remember, even in my studies going, I don't know what that variety is. I need to Google it. Like, I've never heard of it before. So what the heck am I supposed to taste? But such presence and such beautiful wines. I just think that must have been a wonderful time in your life. And so too, maybe not the 13 flights to South Africa. That seems like a bit much, but your time there afterwards sounds incredible and very rewarding.
Yes, and I think with Cosmarin, something interesting to point out as well is that at the time, I still don't really think about wine in boxes or labels in terms of categories. I mean, labels in terms of producers, sure, but is it natural? Is it this? Is it to me? Is it expressing a place and an intention? Does it make me feel something? Does it make me think something? Those are the categories that enter my head. But the fact of the matter is that Caos Marine was one of the first experiences I ever had with natural wine. And I would say that Patrice Lescaret, the founder, is, a world leader in the modern movement of natural wine. However, he never called his wines natural wine. He was farming biodynamically. I didn't understand what that was. I didn't know much about Steiner at the time. Everything that he was doing would fit into that text, that tick box of natural wine. But if I would have asked him at the time, if I even knew what that was, he would have looked at me with eyebrows raised saying, I don't know what you're talking about. I just make these wines. I farm the land. I feel the land, and I express these noble varieties in the way that I feel they're meant to be. So I actually, I guess in many ways, because I don't like wine in categories, I have people say, oh, you're not that into natural wine. And again, my eyebrows raised, what are you talking about? I became a natural winemaker because of the influence of natural wine in my life. I just don't like things that are forced or things that are put into a tick box. So if it's, if you're putting things into a category that is, say, natural wine, and which is, let's not even get started on how you define that, then to me it's, well, okay, but that's not why I would choose it. Give me a wine. Does it say something to me? Can I feel the place? Can I smell the plants that are surrounding the vineyard? Can I see the quizzical look on the winemaker's face as he's tasting or she's tasting that first ferment? I mean, those are the things that move me. And if that means that there's no intervention and there's that clarity, that's fantastic. That's a noble, noble achievement. But you can have clarity with a little bit of mental or physical intervention. So, yeah, Caos Marine certainly shaped me. And I think had I not holidayed there and managed to cross with this amazingly crazy, crazy man, I might not be sitting here in Wanaka, New Zealand, making wines today.
I'm so glad to hear that. I mean, I agree with you. These days, sometimes when you learn about a new brand, I feel like you see it through a kaleidoscope of marketing, and you have to dig through it to get to the essence of who they are and what they're doing and what they're all about. And this is completely the other way, as you were saying, is that it's just a lived lifestyle and experience of how they live their lives and experience the world, and it came down to nothing about brand management and the way that they wanted to sell themselves. I wish I saw a bit more of that in my life. Now, tell me a little bit about when New Zealand even crossed your path. Your first appointment, I believe, was with Villa Maria, and tell me how that came about.
Well, it all, again, circles back to my time in London, which probably as a place had more of an influence on my wine journey or my commencing my wine journey than anywhere else. It's a place where I believe even today, I was there a few years ago, you can access wines from all over the world at all different price points. There's classes and courses and tastings and dinners and things available all the time. And I just started spending all my free time and spare money going to wine classes and wine dinners. And in that process, I discovered at a shop in Notting Hill, Corny and Barrow, Muddy Water Wines, which are now part of the Greystamp Group in North Canterbury. And that would have been, 2000, 2001. So it was sort of at the beginning of Canterbury, really North Canterbury being on the map. And equally, there was a place called Lee and Sandeman where I discovered the wines of Ripon, and that being from Wanaka and Central Otago. And these places weren't on my doorstep, so I'd, take the tube and make a pilgrimage to try these wines. So the wines resonated for me, and I was smitten by New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. I remember Astrolabe and some of the wines that Simon Waghorn was making at the time, and, writing to them to ask if they had a winery and if I could go work for them. So the wine stood out to me. And I think over time, I'd lived in New York, I'd lived in San Francisco, I'd lived in London, spent time in Johannesburg, and I really enjoyed what cities gave me in terms of culture and excitement and bars and restaurants and diversity of people. but I was missing a part of me, which was peace and solitude and mountains and lakes and rivers. And that was certainly the way I grew up in Oregon. Our holidays were camping and fishing and skiing. And so New Zealand, everything I'd read about it sounded like it would be a bit like Oregon in terms of having lakes and rivers and places where you could be alone outside and hear yourself think. And so it was the wines that made me want to discover the place. And so I wrote, I tried to be genuine. As someone who hires interns today, you could see the attempt in the approach. But so I started with things I'd tasted. Certainly, it was before the internet was much of a thing. So I certainly did the research I could on who made the wines and where they were from, and, to try to approach with some authenticity, not just, grabbing anything off a shelf and seeing, if there was a job. So I wrote to, I used to say 70 people, it might've been 50, but it was a lot of people, asking if they would, consider letting me, who knew nothing about winemaking, come and work a harvest. And I figured out it was an interesting lesson in life, because there were a lot of no answers. So we do at Valli, but me personally, we try and make a point that anyone who contacts us asking for a job gets at least something coming back saying, if we have a job available that is suitable, we'll be in touch, but at least an answer. And then some people said, no, thank you, with an excuse. And so anyway, it went a lot like that. And then finally, I got this envelope from, I guess it was email at the time, from Villa Maria saying, yeah, you can come and work harvest, and, the things I needed to do to get visas, etc. I later found out that George Jarris, who was the winemaker at Villa for a long time, a hugely successful winemaker in Marlborough, he used to have his wife help him with the hiring back then. So this was, in 2002 for the 2003 harvest. So they, weren't as big as they were today. Still a relatively small operation. I think we only crushed like 3,000 ton that year or something. But he put all the no piles, and my CV went into the no pile. And then she picked it up and put it in the maybe pile, and it went on like that. And she's a writer and kind of in the more creative space. And she said, I think, George, you might want to look at this one and take a punt. So I've always been grateful to her, because, she thought my CV stood out as being a bit different, maybe a bit crazy. And so George, of course, not wanting to piss off his wife, decided to give me a chance.
Oh, that sliding doors moment of how differently it could have gone, but thankfully it didn't. What was your first impressions when you first got to New Zealand?
I remember landing in Auckland and just the blue sky and what I thought were beautiful smells, and just feeling like I'd arrived somewhere, really special. And a couple of years later, in 2005, when I was going back to harvest at Craigie Range, and I said to the Kiwis there, you arrive in Auckland and the blue skies and the beautiful smells. And they just laughed at me saying, you're in an international airport. Like, it smells terrible. But I think, coming from a place like JFK in New York, it is quite different. And there was just a magic feeling. And then certainly as I got further away from the big cities, the more magical it felt. And I just felt just endless opportunity, even in Marlborough, which was more established at the time than anywhere else, and still makes 75% of the wine from New Zealand. There was just an energy, and I think no matter where you are in Aotearoa, there's an energy that comes from the island, from the place, from the people who founded it. The indigenous culture, everything. The Māori and their connection to the land. You feel that, even if you don't understand until you lived here for a while what all that means. There's a feeling. And I think that the wines from New Zealand, the best examples, encapsulate that feeling, that energy, that connectivity to the land. It's not often something you can articulate clearly. And I think that's okay with wine. I think it's okay that wine can just leave you speechless. And And if you are into wine and you haven't found a wine that left you speechless, you need to keep trying because they're out there. And your speechless wine will be different than my speechless wine. And my speechless wine today will be different than what it is in 6 months or 6 years from now, because we are constantly moving and evolving and in flux, and different things resonate for us at different times. But if wine doesn't move you in that way, if you don't find one now and again that does, then you're probably drinking the wrong things, or you're not thinking about wine in the right way.
So very true. And I think, I'm often asked about breaking down things and trying to explain the science of it all. And that part that is unexplainable is the mystery and the love and the beauty of this incredible product that we have. And I think that it's kind of funny to try. You want to make wine as accessible as possible and draw people in, but there's a certain element that cannot be explained, and that's what's so cool about it. I'd love to know a little bit more about if you managed to make an impression on George, and then how you spent your time in Villa Maria before Terra Sancta entered the picture in 2007.
Well, I was only at Villa Maria just for the 3 months of harvest in 2003. And then I went on to France, and that vintage I worked in the Northern Rhone. This was at a time when I was sort of wondering if Syrah or Pinot were the grapes that captured my heart. I was really enjoying wines from Côte-Rôtie and Condrieu, and I managed through Patrice Lescaret to get a hookup to go work for Pierre Gaillard. So I went there and then back to Patrice Lescaret at Casa Marine. And then I went to the Hunter Valley and then to Craigie Range. So there was a lot of traveling about, but I stayed in touch with, I think because I entered wine in my 30s, I had a different connection to internships, and maybe because I felt so fortunate to be given an opportunity at a second career that had so much meaning. So I never looked at these internships as, what they did for me or, how they helped my career. I always looked at them as the people and them opening their doors to share their knowledge. And that, that was so important and benevolent, and that I tried my best to do a good job. But I would always, send an email or a letter thanking them for the opportunity and maybe highlighting a few of the things that really made a difference to me. And I remember after the first one at Craigie Range, one of the winemakers stayed a very close friend and mentor of mine until he passed away recently. And he said that, the other winemakers were kind of shocked that I'd sent this letter thanking them for the opportunity to work. And if you've ever been an intern, it's pretty bloody hard work. So to thank someone for flogging you, it does seem counterintuitive. But he said nobody does that, and and that's it sets you apart. So years later, when I reminded George that had he not given me the opportunity, I might not be a winemaker. I think we were at a wine awards where both of us had made a wine that got a gong, and he's in his tux and I'm in a dress, and neither of us recognized each other really, because we don't normally dress like that. And it was, kind of, if it hadn't been for you, I might not be wearing this frock. So I've, of the 35 harvests I've done, obviously some of them are for the same producer. There would probably be only one or two where that tide doesn't remain on some level. And I think that's important. And there have been a couple of times where I've had, people drop me a note or, thank me for giving them the opportunity. And it's great when you kind of see other people recognizing that this hard work is all part of the journey. And it's, like you said, the sliding door moments, and it's people opening these doors or windows for you, because it's a lot of trust. When you need the labor, of course, I'm not going to put any fluffy spin on it. So you need these people to come and help you because there's not enough local labor with the skills that you need for those 8 weeks of harvest. So you need them, but at the same time, you're opening your doors and you're entrusting them with, 12 months work growing these grapes, with equipment that's really expensive and mission critical, with health and safety, like a mother hen hoping nobody hurts themselves on our watch. So there's so much trust that these producers are giving these people that come in for just a moment in time. And so it's a pretty special thing. I don't know that many people think of it other than just 8 weeks of hard work and putting it on your CV that you work there and move on. And for me, it was much more than that. It wasn't about CV building. It was about trying to learn and share and connect and give back and appreciate that opportunity was a gift.
It's so beautifully said, because I now I'm going to rename you as Jen, the queen of the follow-up. But I think that it's so important. We are often so busy and so time poor in our lives we've created for ourselves that reflection and sending a simple email or a note of thanks for something you've taken away is often the step that we just forego. And I think, I worked in restaurants for a long time, and I would often say, often an email to say we had a great time was much more rewarding than a tip at the end of the day. Save yourself some money, but say something nice about an experience or someone you've come across. And I think that always that little bit of reflection is really important. Like you said, it can open doors, but it can also just make someone's day, and that's so important too. So you then went on, Jen, to Terra Sancta. And what did you learn there?
So I was trying to find a permanent role in New Zealand. And again, I think fate intervenes more often than we think. So I was on a shortlist for quite a while for a job in Marlborough. And I thought that, to be brutally honest, I thought that I was going to get it. And they sort of thought they were going to give it to me until, closer to the time where the job really actually was open, somebody with more experience finishing wines, a better fit came along. And I'm still friends with the gentleman who didn't hire me. And at the time I was heartbroken. I mean, there were tears. I really wanted to start my life in New Zealand. But I appreciate that he did make the better choice for what they needed. And had I got that job, I might be living in Marlborough today. Who knows? So I spent a little bit of time in Oregon because it was easy with the visa, and it was nice to spend time near my family. And obviously there are meaningful wines made there, and I made a lot of friends. But at the time I was still trying hard to get back to New Zealand. I'd never worked in Central Otago. I'd visited there briefly here. My first time in 2003, I did a tiki tour around the South Island. So I knew of the wines, but I knew nothing about the place. But I saw this opening for a job at Olson's, and the winemaker, Matt Connell, had been the assistant winemaker at Elk Cove in Oregon, and he was married to an American, had lived in Oregon for some time, and he wanted to get someone from outside of the region. He wanted something a little bit different, some new energy, new ideas. And so he would have checked my references, but he kind of hired me sight unseen because he understood Oregon. He understood American women, at least a little bit with his wife. And he offered me the job. So I came down in February 2007 to Cromwell and started working for him at Olson's. In 2009, at the end of 2008, he moved on to take the head winemaking job at Akarua, and Olson's offered the job to me. So I was their winemaker from 9 to 11, and then Terra Sancta bought it in 11. And they brought in different vineyards. They built a winery. There was a lot that happened at that time. Olson's was the oldest, or the first to plant grapes in the Bannockburn subregion of Central Otago, which is possibly the most notorious subregion because of the stature of the larger wineries that are making amazing wine that travels around the world, the Felton Rhodes, the Carricks, the Rothschilds just bought Akarua. There's some great, great brands that have been around for quite some time in Bannockburn. So it was a privilege to work with those older vines and really just throw myself into the community. I didn't know anyone. And I was the same age as a lot of these amazing winemakers, but I was, well behind in terms of my experience because they started in their 20s and I didn't start until I was 30. So it was an exciting time. And I figured the way to get ahead or to fill the gap of knowledge and not having as much time in the seat was just to throw myself out there and volunteer for anything and committees and for the collective, marketing things and events and this and that. And I just want to meet people. And that's certainly when I met Grant Taylor, was early on the scene when I arrived. And those were the wines, everybody used to talk about if you could, when we were assistant winemakers or interns or, in the beginning part of our journey, he'd often say, "Oh, if you could work anywhere, where would it be?" And there'd be some places that you would expect that where people wanted to work, Felton, Nanarangi, those sorts of things. But I always said Valli, and the reason was twofold. One, I really just quickly understood the amazing dynamicism of this place when I tried different wines from the same vintage from the same producer that had this thread that made me feel like there was a commonality. There was kind of like this gentle whisper of familiarity across the three or four of them, but they were all so different, and that fascinated me. And it's not often that you actually do get to meet your favorite movie star or do get to work for the company that if you could work anywhere, you would. And, eventually I was able to do that. But Felton, Terra Sancta was in between. And that was quite an interesting transition from Olson's, which at the time was, to be honest, financially challenged. And they were trying to sell it. It was a couple that split up. They were getting on with some health issues. So it was, every day wondering if we were going to be there next year, to then being a part of a new brand from very savvy business people with investment, both in vineyards and a new winery, and a totally different way of thinking about things. So it was sort of chalk and cheese, the experiences. I think they both added value to my next steps. But after 3 years of helping Terra Sancta launch their brand, something in the back of my head told me that, I wanted to be on a different pathway to the one that they were on. I wanted something a little bit different. And I was about to get married, so I thought, let's just leave this chapter and see where the next chapter goes. And I wasn't sure. So when I left there, I started a small consultancy with help from Sarah Kate Deneen at Maud, because she recognized through the contract work that they were doing in their winery that there were a lot of little growers that maybe were growing grapes for other people, but also had their own brand, and they really needed someone to be an advocate for them and to help them with their own little brand and give them direction, give them some surety that their wine was being looked after. So I started that, and then I called Grant Taylor, because when I was promoted to head winemaker at Olson's, Heather McPherson, the owner, said, we always like with our new winemaker to have, a mentor for a year or two so that you have someone to talk to. We pay them for this role so that it's a business relationship rather than feeling obligated. And then we can also check in to make sure that, our winemaker has the resource, or basically that they know what they're doing and they're the right winemaker. So we talked about who that might be. And I said, what about Grant Taylor? He seems like a nice guy. He's been making wine a while. I see him around. And Heather said, Grant would be a great idea. So our relationship started back then in 2009 in a professional capacity. And he'd come, now and again. He'd answer the phone if I called, and he'd check in once in a while. I always said it's true. He'd show up at lunchtime and ask me what kind of toasted sandwich I was making. So I'd feed him. But and he'd tell me about tastings, and he just kind of looked out for me. And then when it came to select the blends, which I think any young winemaker would tell you, your first shot at blending is terrifying. And, because there is no right answer. And how do you, if you've taken over for someone, how do you move things forward but keep it consistent, all that stuff. And he came and tasted with me, and he didn't tell me what to do, but he gave me the courage to trust my own choices. And then a few months later, he rang up Heather McPherson and said, whatever you're paying me, just give it to her. She doesn't need my help, and I'd happily just answer her phone call anyway. So I rang him and said, we've talked about maybe doing something together, and it's kind of now or never, buddy. I'm about to go on my honeymoon, and I'd love to know that I have a job to come back to. But whatever job it is, I know myself, and I'm going to sink my teeth into it, and I'm going to be in that job for the foreseeable future. So what do you think? And it was a bit of a risk for him. It was a bit of a risk for me, but the timing was right. And I was over at his house about 10:30 in the morning, and we shook hands. We sealed the deal with a little dram of single malt whiskey, something we both really enjoy. And and we've never looked back. And we didn't really define how it was going to work and who was going to do what and what, titles or any of that. It was just, let's work together. And it just naturally evolved into him more or less handing the winemaking responsibility over to me. And, he's always been a part of that. I wouldn't want to make Valli wines without Grant as a sounding board. Winemakers who work as individuals never make the best wines. It's all about teamwork. And also it's something he created. And I have so much respect for, he created this with his own money, which he didn't have much of. And it was all successful through good choices, luck. I think restraint, not trying to go too large or, not trying to be all things to all people, just sticking to his intuition and to his guns, and then growing sort of a little bit all the time and surrounding himself by people who believed in the story and wanted to be a part of it. So yeah, that's kind of, I guess, the segue to how I started at Valli. And I feel like in many ways I've been here a lot longer than 11 vintages. And, I hope that this will be where I wind down my winemaking career. It's really something that's become a huge part of me as a person. And the wines just kind of are part of, they're just a part of me, I guess, in a way, as they feel something really personal. And it's such a privilege to be a part of this journey, and to be able to help Valli and work with Grant. And yeah, it's just, it's a dream come true. And sometimes you just have to throw it out there and hope that whoever finds that bottle with the note that brushes up on the shore actually reads the note and something happens.
What an amazing story. I think first off that idea of a mentorship is so smart, not just as a business decision, but also, just providing that connection to someone else. I think that's really cool of them to do that, and brave and bold of you to just go after Grant. I think that's so fantastic, and wonderful that it's paid off. You said earlier that Shiraz and Pinot Noir spoke to you, which I think is really quite fascinating. You're now working with single vineyard Pinot Noir. And I will remember when the wines first crossed my desk and I said, I wasn't the head sommelier at the time, and I asked why we bought all of the wines. And I remember the head sommelier telling me, well, it's the story is all these single sites. You can't really just pick and choose because the story is within all of them. And it was the first time that I really started to listen and pay attention to these different sites within Central Otago. What is it like now to work? You're based out of Gippsland, but what is it like to work with all these single sites and to tell that story?
Well, our winery actually moved to Cromwell in my second vintage. We outgrew the little shack in Gippsland. And because I live in Wanaka, traveling to Gippsland is pretty full on, no matter whether you go over the mountain pass or through the gorge. So it just made sense to move to a bigger space that was more central. So we're now in Cromwell, and we added another subregion, Pisa, really in 2022, but in bottle in 2023. And through other projects, I've worked with fruit from Alexandra and other, we used to do an exchange with Burn Cottage. So I've seen Lowburn fruit. So I, in any single season, am working in depth with at least 4 growing areas in Central Otago. Plus, we haven't even touched upon the mighty Waitaki Valley, North Otago, which is a whole other GI, a whole other growing area. But the magic's in how each place has its own identity. And what I learned pretty quickly is when you are dedicated to expressing places. So it's not necessarily single vineyard for us, especially, as we grew our volume a little bit, we had to find like-minded vineyards, either that Grant had worked with before or relationships that I had, but that farmed, to our ethos and really were synergistic with what we were doing with our estate vineyards. But when you're capturing that, it's not really about making the best wine. It's really about best expressing a place. And it's a very different concept to when I've made Central Otago blends for, like a negociant, when it really is about trying to make the best wine and all the little pieces together have that connectivity and they shine, right? Well, when you're trying to express a place, if you don't respect the truth of that place, even if, and that truth should scare you. It should make you question. Then I don't think you're really being true to expressing place. So in any given season, one place will make me feel comfortable. One place will teach me something. One place will scare the living daylights out of me, and every season that changes, but it always keeps me on my toes. And the great thing about, Valli's commitment to expressing seasonality, so you got to roll with the seasons that you're given, is that each new season is like a new discovery. So trying to create wines with consistency that have the honesty of expressing a place the way it wants to express itself, not the way you think it should be expressed. And then also not becoming, ho-hum and the same every year. I mean, that's a real challenge, right? We're not making non-vintage wines. We're not making wines that, are supercars with all the polish and gloss and shine. We're making true expressions of place and embracing very different seasonality. And that seasonality may be different from one subregion to the next. So in classic case 24, Bendigo had all of the challenges of the season, where a few of the other, Gibson sailed through. So, or it could just be one season is downright challenging across the board, and another is like, that was, easier than it usually is, So there's so much to it. But I think anybody who wants to make wine that might one day stop somebody in their tracks has to be honest about what it is they're doing and why they're doing it. So in our case, as I said, it's about finding these places that have something to say and being the narrator. It's really kind of like what you're doing. You're trying to draw out, some things about my journey, but you're not telling me what to say. You're trying to coax out things that you think might be interesting. And that's exactly what we do with these places. And it's really, really special to be able to be terrified, exhilarated, restrained, bold, all of those things every year. And if you're not all of those things, then you're not going to do a very good job. And if you're not scared at the end of it, I don't think you've pushed yourself as hard as you should have.
I feel like that you are somebody that enjoys the whole gambit of emotions and life experiences, and it doesn't surprise me why Pinot Noir has become, your focus, because as it is the heartbreak grape, it is very easy to fall in love with as well. I would love to know a little bit about your palate as well, Jen. If you could only have 3 drinks for the rest of your life, what would they be and why?
Drinks. Well, certainly wine. I don't know if you want, if the answer could be 3 different wines, but wine would certainly feature. I alluded to single malt whiskey before, but I've kind of changed as to whether it needs to be single malt since recent discovery of all things Japanese. I'm spending time there. I'm making some wine there. Valli exports wine there. I'm going there for holiday to ski. And the Japanese single grain or blended whiskeys, I think, also are pretty fantastic. So I'll just say whiskey. And for me, I guess, like I said, if you ask me a question today versus 6 months from now, today I'm going to say sake. So wine, whiskey, and sake would be the 3 drinks that I'd like to take to that desert island with me.
Oh, very good choices. I'm a big fan of sake too, and I find there's so many moments that sake makes better. Amazing choices. Jen, you are so passionate about what you do. You speak so well, but your wines are sublime. And every time I've had the chance to listen to you, I've come away feeling like I have learnt quite a lot and feeling definitely more enriched. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for taking an interest in our wines. Appreciate it.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Stay tuned for more stories from the world of wine and drinks. Listen in every Thursday on your podcast app. Follow us on Instagram at overaglasspod and contact us at overaglass@deepintheweeds.com.au.